Hi, I'm the Noob Woodworker, and in the next couple weeks we're going to get the saw reassembled and in a good working condition. Stay tuned. So starting out, I pressed the bearings in using a couple nuts, some washers, and a threaded rod. And the hardest part about this was getting everything aligned right. Getting the bearing on the arbor was probably the easiest part. Arbor was refrigerated so that the metal would shrink. And it was just a matter of tapping it in. Getting the bearing assembled the rest of the way took very little effort. Just a couple taps from the dead blow and everything slipped right into place. In between videos, when I was doing some work on the saw, I took a closer look at the cord that I'd been plugging into the wall and realized just how bad it was. So this whole cord needed to be replaced, but in order to do that I had to pull the switch box. I don't know if the video picks it up, but sawdust was just falling out of everything. Even this box was about halfway filled. Having this organization box really saved me in the end, too. And here you can see just how bad that cord was. How close I was to shocking the ever-loving crap out of myself with 240. Now I plan on installing dust extraction on this because you can see how full of sawdust just everything was. Between this video and my disassembly video, a lot of the problems with the trunnions all came from everything being impacted with sawdust, so the only way to get dust extraction in here was to separate these two halves. Now, even though I'm cobbling together something homemade, I go back and look on the Grizzly site and look in their manual, this is exactly how they do it as well. Measure twice, cut once. Now the size of these casters and not having any locks on them meant that anytime I cut something or moved this saw around, it was extremely wobbly, especially on this concrete floor, which is not 100% level. So a wobbly saw is not very safe. So as temporary feet, I'm just going to use some 1/4-20 bolts with washers and nuts. For the dust port, I just tried to center it as best I could and use a square to align it. And then to get the size for the final cutout, I just used the same square to offset everything in about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. And the original plan was just to hang this over the edge of the table and drill through it in order to put in all the corner holes. But then I realized that if I just pulled out my insert plate, I could support the work from both sides. Yes, the base plate is bent on my jigsaw. You ever get frustrated and throw a jigsaw? I have. Like I know what I'm doing. Now, genius me, after filming all those cutting videos, I forgot to zoom the camera back out when I did all the prep work for the painting, so none of that footage is used. Well, this is the only 10 seconds or so that I could actually use. But the entire saw, the Grizzly logo and bevel markings are taped off. The whole thing is spray painted the same John Deere green. I drilled these holes at irregular intervals so that no matter how this table saw was reassembled, it would not be possible to put this insert in the wrong way, and the holes will always line up.
Almost.
Stay out of the camera, please.
You did it. Oh, good one. one. Big grill. You're a big one. Like I'm a big one, Daddy.
After all that was done, I mounted the port from the bottom so that there wouldn't be a lip for the sawdust to get stuck under. In hindsight, the port should have probably been the last thing I put on, because it did make reassembling the trunnions at the base a pain in the butt. And this reassembly step is where the organization box really shines. It let me know if I was forgetting to put something on, or what order sometimes to put things on. And here's just the 1/2-inch bolts that hold down the far side of the trunnion. This will give me a base from which to work from. Everything was spray painted with Rust-Oleum black, but the threads on these rods were all taped off. This is the only part that threads. Now, I definitely went about reassembling this joint the wrong way. Before I even drove that rod in at all, I should have put in the wavy washers first. Because of the taper in the middle of the rod here, and in fact it has shoulders and not tapers on it, it really made it a pain. At one point I needed to remove that rod to get some work done, and I couldn't even take it out because the first washer had slipped out of place. I probably spent the better part of about an hour and a half working on this, and of course just edited it down to about 10 minutes. If that pin had been solid all the way through, this would have been a lot easier to assemble. And this is where that organization box also came in handy, because I forgot to put on this nut. All this is a retaining nut to keep the arbor from having any slop. Tapping on the side of the arbor mount itself was enough to create some space and slip that washer in. Hammering on the side of such a thin washer is probably not the best idea, but it worked out. Now all that hammering around, that second washer's all lined up, but the first one is not. Which is why I had to come back with a screwdriver and tap that back into where it goes. I'm just using some more of this brake grease as a lubricant. And it really worked perfectly. It's thick enough that it stays put and I don't have to worry about it dripping anywhere. In that end plate, just above that trunnion, you can see a hole that I won't be screwing any piece into. I don't have the piece that goes in there. That is actually for the blade guard that goes over the top of the blade, and do not have it, and I do not intend on using it. That's there so that that will bevel with the blade. And also, since this saw, unlike many others, the trunnions are actually attached to the tabletop rather than being attached to the base. So when you're making adjustments to the alignment of your blade to your table, you'd want to loosen up these trunnion bolts and tap it around with a dead blow rather than moving the table around, because no matter how you move the table, the blade's going to move with it. You can see how easily that bevel adjustment moves. I'm quite happy with how it came out. The top right nut from this point of view, I was having problems with in disassembly. But I did realize that if you just shifted the bevel over all the way, you could access it to loosen it up. And this is just part of the depth adjustment. Now that it won't get in the way, I can add on the pulley that I removed. First is a key that stops it from rolling on the arbor, and then just a quick tap from the dead blow puts it in place. Later on I'll have to true this up so that it's in line with the motor, but it turned out I actually got it right on the first try. This rod and worm gear is for the bevel adjustment. I actually put it together wrong in this scene, and I go back and fix that later. That locking collar should not be between the trunnion and the worm gear. It should be on the other side, locking it in place. And I'm just going to add 2 mounting screws to hold the tabletop down. All I'm going to be doing is working on the surface, and I'll have to come back and work on the bottom later. I'm going to put these wings on the same way I took them off. I'm going to put in just the middle screw to keep it level while I put in the 2 ends. I'm going to use the level as a straight edge and tap both sides level until I can't see light passing underneath anymore. When I do the surface, it's going to be sanded down and polished, and I don't want to round over the edges. Now I'm just going after this with a wire wheel, and that's going to do a lot of the work here, especially in the miter slots. And you can just see how much rust is flying off this thing. If anybody has any suggestions for dust masks that don't fog up glasses, I'm open to suggestions. I'm going to start off with an old sanding pad that I already had on here, because the wings are going to have overspray on them from when I painted. And I'm going to use this old disc, and it's just going to load up with paint. The table surface was cleaned up with acetone in between coats, and I took care not to splash any on my paint job. This is just so I can see what I'm doing and clean off the dust, so I'm not just sanding over the same area that doesn't need it anymore. And you can see there's a lot of the rust is gone, but there's still to do. I switch over to a scouring pad here. Maybe in the future when I have more time and I get myself an angle grinder, I can get myself a Scotch-Brite wheel, and that'll really clean this up. The only thing I had available to really get down into the miter slots was a hand wire brush. The sander won't do it, and the wire wheel doesn't quite cut it for getting down into the corners. Now for the most part, this table's clean. I got up all the rust and worked all some scale down in the miter slots. I don't have any tools that bottom out in the miter slots. So what I'm going to do is just seal the surface now to keep it from oxidizing further. And I'm just using paste wax. I never expected to get a mirror finish on this. And I'm just going to rub in 3 or 4 coats of paste wax. just going to flip the table over all in one piece so that I can continue working on the rest. That glove that's there is just to protect any dust from getting down into the arbor bearings. And here I'm fixing my mistake with that worm gear. And I'm just going to drop in the stop here. Nothing's adjusted at this point. Until I get a good machinist square, it's not going to. The stops aren't going to be set yet. Now this stop struck me as kind of odd because all it does is run into the table. I'm going to do my best to grease up this worm gear with more of that wheel bearing grease. As you can see, the movement in this bevel is so good that I can just turn it with one hand. I don't even need the wheel on the end. The depth adjustment was a lot harder to do because without the indicator on the front, there's nothing for the worm gear to press against, so there's no resistance. So turning it would have just unscrewed it. Those cloths are just on the corner to protect my nicely clean surface. And now that everything's in place, it's time to get ready for the final reassembly. Finally, once I've got the table all lined up, I'm going to tighten everything down. I found out that messing around with the bevel adjustment allows me to get to all 4 screws. Once again, you can just see how fluid the movement is on that bevel. The unpainted surface that you see at the front here won't be visible when everything's done. I plan on putting an extension on here. This is another one of those installs that would have been a lot easier if I hadn't put the dust collection port on the bottom. I apologize for the way my voice sounds right now. Even though in this video I'm wearing a coat, I can assure you I just mowed the lawn yesterday, so my allergies are going crazy. And there actually wasn't much point to putting this indicator back on. I really don't intend on using it, only for getting rough estimates. I do plan on getting a digital reader. My ever hated tension pins. I probably fought with these for about half an hour. This one I just gave up and cut it off. this wheel I call the knuckle buster because of how close it is to the top of the table. I learned from my first mistake. I left this pin long and then cut it off once it was in place. There just wasn't enough to grab on the first pin. After these wheels were on, I had to go back and retighten everything that I'd been whacking with a hammer. Too far? That concludes the second video in this series. In the next video, we're going to be finishing up the saw as far as restoration goes. Like the video if you like, subscribe if you want. The intent of this channel is just to help pay for shop costs, and it's never intended to be profit driven. So, see you guys next time.